Jenny Critchlow. Morning, everybody, and welcome to your weekly podcast with me, Jenny Critchlow. If you remember from the last podcast, we left by deciding to maybe start looking at being much more of an observer of what we're thinking and feeling. And in that moment of being the observer, allowing ourselves to put a gap between our thoughts, our reactions, the things we do immediately. The reaction is quite an interesting word, isn't it? It means to react. In other words, to act again and again and again. So to do something that isn't particularly real, to act and to keep doing it. And so putting a gap between that immediate reaction that we all tend to do, that the reactions are hardwired in us, we learn behaviours that we don't observe, to put a gap between that reaction and observing, noticing the truth, the reality of what's going on, allows us to bring other behaviours and other thoughts into our experience, and that allows us to start changing our effect on the world and to question what it is we assume has just happened. And when I was re-listening to that podcast, thinking about what we were going to talk about today, I remembered a conversation I had a few days ago that was the most perfect example, I think anyway, of how we can do that. So I picked up my daughter and her friend from the station, and they'd had a day out in town. And we're driving back, and her friend was telling me about how he'd been in the shopping mall, and there was a point where he'd done something, I don't know what it was, turned around or done his shoelace off, but something that drew slight attention to himself. And he just said, this guy looked him up and down like he was a piece of poo on a shoe. And see, I didn't swear. That's really good. I'm doing really well with this. So this guy looked him up and down like he was a bit of poo on a shoe, and then completely and utterly blanked him and walked away. And this friend of my daughter's just said, that set off so much anxiety. It was really horrible. I just felt terrible about things. And so just let that settle for a second. I said, okay, well, do you want to work this with me? Because we can't. Okay, right. First of all, let's look at the first sentence. Let's look at this sentence. And the sentence we looked at first was, this person totally and utterly blanked me. So that's the sentence. That's the belief. That's the sentence, the thought, the reaction, is that this person totally blanked him. And all I did was ask him if that was true. Did he truly, absolutely and utterly blank you? And let's put a pause there. And then this friend said, no, because he looked me up and down. I was like, okay, wonderful, that's brilliant. It doesn't matter the whys and wherefores, we can't know. The fact remains is that already you've got a sentence that causes you distress, he completely blanked me, that isn't true. Awesome. Right. So let's look at the next one. This person looked at you like you were a bit of poo on a shoe. Is that true? Can you absolutely know that that's true? And he paused and he said, well, no. Okay. Can you successfully, with 100% guarantee, read someone else's mind? Know what they're thinking when you look at them? Because if he can, I'd make a living out of that. That sounds like an awesome thing to be able to do. But I've yet to find or meet anybody that knows definitely what someone else is thinking. And he said, yeah, so no, I don't know that he was looking at me in such a negative way. My word negative, but in such a negative way. Right. And then what did you do? And he said, well, he walked away. Right. So let's look at the reality of what happened. A man turned and observed you for a second and then walked away. That is the reality of what happened. That is the isness. What is a look from a human being, and then this human being used their legs to propel them forward and went on their merry way. That's it. But the story this boy told himself was that he was a bit of poo on a shoe and worth being ignored or blanked. And what we then looked at was that we tell the story about the outside world that confirms our worst fears, that confirms what we're worried about inside. I don't know his internal life at all. He may not even be a him. I've made him a him because he was a girl, and I'm just making sure there's no confidentiality here. But either way, whatever happened is that he did what all human beings do, which is make the outside world agree with our inside world. And we do that by making up stories. We see rejection, we see fear, we see things to be frightened of. Someone emailed the other day, just as a by the by, with a whole new setting for fear. So I've always seen fear as standing for false evidence appearing real, which I think the source point for that was Neale Donald Walsch in Conversations with God. And we also use one in recovery called Face Everything and Recover. But she emailed to say there was a lovely one from Ram Dass, which is feeling excited and ready, which I thought was a fantastic way of looking at fear. So just put that in while it came in. Anyway, we're with this friend of my daughter's, and what I'm saying is that, can you see that person, that boy, took a look from another human and another human walking in a mall, and made it into such a negative experience for himself that he felt really anxious and upset. And what I then said is, that's where we look. That's where we look. Gosh, if I can look at the reality and see the only thing I know for a fact that happened is a man looked at me and walked away on his legs, and I go into anxiety and shame and fear or whatever he was going into, there's something there for me. And that's the growth. We notice that there is a point in us that may feel invisible, that may feel irrelevant. Okay, you'll have to fill a gap in there. I can't hear whether I've pronounced that right or not. Fill in the gaps. And allowed him an observation moment of what's going on inside of him. But what we do as humans is we ignore that bit, that really, really useful bit, and instead make that person a horrible person. What a horrible person. He looked at me like this and then he walked away. I mean, just completely blanked me. And off we go, and we shove all that on this person that we haven't got a clue about. We don't know whether he's a saint or some kind of mass murderer. We just don't know. And we take our internal story and blame others for it. And if we could do that successfully, then fine. But my point is it doesn't change for you. Nothing changes for you in the outside world until you do the internal work. And we are always trying to get our own attention about what work needs doing. So every time in the outside world we take something personally, separating out the reality from what we took personally gives us clues about the work we need to do inside. And when we start doing that, not only do you give yourself a shot at doing things differently, and a shot at looking at where you feel inadequate and not enough and fearful and shameful. And that word shame comes up all the time, doesn't it? Until we do that, we can do nothing about the outside world because we're constantly making it agree with our inside world. And so we see outside of us what we feel inside of us. And I was so grateful to this person, and I did ask their permission to use it as a story on this podcast. But it was such a perfect example of so little happening and so much going on inside. And it gives us the chance to change it. And then, as I say all the time, once you're more at peace inside with your world, you become more at peace outside with the world. That is the journey. And it's the only journey worth making. what a powerful lesson this person brought into our lives. I was so grateful to him for agreeing that I could use it. And so let's do that this week, is understanding that every time you observe in someone else something negative about you, that's you observing your negative about you. And see what you can do. Go and look at where it hurts and begin there. Begin with your wounds. That felt really powerful to do that podcast. It's been really lovely chatting to you, and I'm looking forward already to chatting to you next week. Thank you for listening.